710 KRV TalkBack, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, hello there, a microphone, streaming live on KURV.com, 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK. Website is talkbackonline.com. We're here to give the facts and try to get rid of the nonsense. I think we just heard a program here. I don't know how much of it there was, but really wasn't. I'm not going to talk about it too much because I have another topic to talk about. But I think it's important to realize that there's only one constitutional democratic republic in the Middle East, and that's Israel. That the only country in the Middle East where women are treated equally as men is Israel. That the countries that were created, that exist now, whether it's Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, or any of the rest, they were created in the 1920s. They're not ancient Arab states. They were created in the 1920s by the victorious Allied powers, primarily England and France of World War I, that took the land, stole the land from the Ottoman Turks, and then gave it to the Arabs, not because of any issues of justice, but because the Arabs were allies with the English. They were allies with the English in order to betting that the English would win, and then that they would get their land back. And of course, the English were interested in being allies with the Arabs because if the Arabs promised them the oil that was beneath the land of the Middle East, which is the only reason that they got involved. A Jewish state of Israel was meant to be created, as well as a Christian state of Lebanon. The Christian state of Lebanon was created, but the Jewish state of Israel was not created in the 1920s, which led directly to the Holocaust. The British White Paper of 1939 prevented immigration only of Jews into the Middle East, allowed Arabs and others to come into the Middle East, but not, or particularly Palestine, which, by the way, is a country that never existed. Was created during Roman times after the defeat of Israeli rebellion, before the birth of Muhammad, before any Arabs were in the region whatsoever, and even before Christianity came in any significance to the region, which was sometime later, with the creation of Constantinople by the Emperor Constantine. The issues of the Middle East are created specifically by intolerance. The amount of land that Israel has is 8,000 square miles. Compare that to the hundreds of thousands of square miles of Arab land surrounding it. Saudi Arabia is a country which no one talks much about. Their founding was created by one tribe killing the members of the other tribes, taking over the country, and then the British finding oil underneath their sands. It's a country that was formed at the turn of the 20th century. It has no legitimacy. There are no constitutional democratic republics in the Middle East besides for Israel. Israel is the only country that allows Arabs to vote in the Middle East, at least unrestricted voting, which is, to me, a problem, actually, because I would not allow Arabs to vote in Israel. I think we have seen the way the Palestinians, so-called Palestinians, function in Gaza and in the West Bank. The entire issue was made up by Arabs for Western European consumption. And the conflicts continue in the Middle East because terrorism is a profit-making business, which the Arabs have latched onto. Yasser Arafat is a terrorist trained by the East Germans. He is not Palestinian, not from the region. He's trained by East Germans. His uncle was one of the rabid anti-Semites at the turn of the century that led pogroms against Jews. Yasser Arafat was trained by the communist East Germans specifically in order to cause trouble in the Middle East for the Western powers. It was not a question of Palestinian rights or anything of that nature. The issue against Israel is because it has nothing to do with land. It has to do that Israel is populated with Jews. pogroms and genocide against Jews have been going on for hundreds of years throughout much of the world due to intolerance. That intolerance was long before there was any issue of Palestine. Hitler did not kill 6 million Jews because he was on the side of the Palestinians. The situation in the Middle East with the Jewish is simply a Jew, non-Jew issue, and in many instances a Christian, non-Christian issue. The intolerance demonstrated towards the Christians, whether the Coptic Christians in Egypt, or whether it's the Maronite Christians in Lebanon, or whether it's the Christians anywhere in the Middle East, is because they're Christians. Once again, not a land issue. It's because they're Christians. The decimation of the population of Christians in Iraq under the noses of the United States is once again a situation of intolerance. The oppression of the Coptic Christians now in Egypt is a question of intolerance. The Arab Muslim and Muslims in general are intolerant of any other point of view. That's been well documented, and of course, they'll agree to it. They say that there's the only religion that should exist. Israel has the rights to its land, like most of us. Every nation in the world today has possession of its land because it took it from somebody else. There is not a nation in the world today that exists in the country that it calls its home that was not taken by some other people. That's just the human nature. And by the way, I don't know if Pete is listening or not, but I'd like him to, I like some facts about his scurrilous assertion that the Jews have been slaughtering people in Israel since they took over. I've always known that Pete has a certain anti-Semitic streak in him, but I thought that was kind of interesting. So the issue is an issue of intolerance and anti-Semitism, and let's not shroud it in this nonsense about land. Because there was no Palestinian, there was no land there that was owned by anybody. It was territory that was conquered and conquered again. It was conquered by Assyrians, conquered by the Greeks. It's conquered by the Ottomans. They held it for 400 years. Then conquered by the British and the French. This territory held there. Palestine is not a country that ever existed. It has never has been an independent country of Palestine ever in the history of the world. Though there's all the documentation, there was independent states of Israel there that go back for thousands of years. The Crusades were led by the European Christians in order to retake the land stolen or taken from them by the Arab Muslims that came into the region in the 7th century. Muhammad never set foot in the Middle East or never set foot in Israel. No documented evidence of that whatsoever, that he ever set foot there. And the invasion from the Arabian Peninsula into the Middle East occurred after Muhammad's death. By that time, Christians had been there in force for 300 years. They were slaughtered by the Muslims. The Crusades were nothing but an attempt by the Reconquista, by the Christian Church to try to retake the land that had been taken from them about 400 years before. So, I mean, there's a long history there, but I think if you have to get down to the crux of the issue is simply this. The only reason that there's this enmity and this issue about this so-called nonsensical issue about land for peace in the Middle East is a question of intolerance. When the Palestinians tried to take over Jordan, they were slaughtered in mass by King Hussein. The Christians are slaughtered in mass by the Arabs in Lebanon because they want to get rid of the Christians there. So it goes on and on. The only reason that there's this enmity towards Israel is because it is populated by Jews. I can assure you 100%, if there was a land in Israel that was populated by population other than the so-called Palestinian population by an invasive force of, let's say, Egyptians or somebody else, there would not be one word of protest, as there were no protests when the Palestinians were kicked out of Jordan by King Hussein. No protests there. The slaughter of Muslim Arabs and Muslim Arabs greatly exceeds anything the Jews have done, and everything the Jews have done has been in self-defense, whether it was 1967 war, the Yom Kippur War, every war subsequently. Just because you launch a preemptive strike against armies that are arrayed against you, that exist only to destroy you, then that is self-defense. Every war that Israel has fought in the Middle East has been a war of survival and self-defense. At a minimum, the Jews in Israel have as much a right to the property there as anyone. This nonsense that Pete brought up about European Zionists coming in and kicking out the Middle Eastern Jews is a bunch of garbage. There's Rabin and the name skips me for the moment, first prime minister, were beating up on Menachem Begin as much as they were beating, and the Irgun as much as they were beating up on anybody else. Anyway, it's just baloney and nonsense by these ivory tower isolated individuals who haven't any idea what they're talking about, spouting nostrums and nothing but illustrating their ignorance, such as the individual who was here before. And it's just kind of infuriating to me when, but then again, it's nothing new in this world. The people who talk about the Jewish question, the same people committing abortion of the undelivered infant today. And the same people who support the destruction of Israel. This baloney about it becoming an internationalized country. Name me an internationalized country. There is no such thing. It cannot exist. The Jews have a right to their own land because they have a long history of being persecuted in every place where they're a minority. They're not the only minority that's been persecuted. Most minorities are persecuted in the nations that they live in. And it doesn't matter what minority it is, they tend to be persecuted. That is the way of man. Israel, the United States, and the United Nations did not give Israel to the Jews. The Jews took it through war and violence, just the same as everyone else does, just the same as the United States did in order to form our own country. Now we have John calling, 7 KRV. John, thanks for calling.
All right. I want to go back a little farther. I want to go back to Woodrow Wilson. Remember, World War I, they had sheep on the White House lawn. And Sigmund Freud and Wilson were born in the same year. And Sigmund Freud published a book later on saying that Wilson was insane. Well, basically, he's put it.
What's that got to do with what I'm talking about, John?
All right, going back to the Middle East. All right. Yeah, but see, World War I was the League of Nations.
The United States never joined the League of Nations.
If that would have gone through, then you wouldn't have had the UN. And, then they created, in about 48, Israel.
They did not create Israel. Israel had existed for 3,000 years by that point.
Well, sure.
What they did create was Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, and whatever else is Iraq. I keep forgetting the name Iraq in there.
Yeah,
that's who they did. That's who they did create.
Well, yeah, but Israel was there in the Middle Ages already.
Long before the Middle Ages.
Yes, it was. Richard the Lionheart went over there in the Crusades and fought.
Right, but Israel had been there for 2,000 years by that time.
Years, yes, they had been. Yes, and it's been occupied and reoccupied by many different forces.
Right.
And then, of course, Syrians and what have you, and Israel has a right to defend itself. Then,
not according to some people.
No, but then
the same people who say that the undelivered infant has no right for self-defense either. Same group of people.
And then Jimmy Carter did the Camp David Accord.
What a disaster that turned out to be.
Well, yeah, that turned out to be a real fiasco. And then Egypt again is in turmoil. Syria is in turmoil.
Absolutely.
It's the same thing. The cycle just keeps repeating.
Right.
We've been better off if we were let Iran attack Iraq like they did and push on in, and then eventually Saudi Arabia would have come in with
we
troops
should
and
yeah,
handled them.
right. We should have let Iraq and Saddam Hussein take over Saudi Arabia. But the United States
Yes.
oil interests trumped the United States political interests. Anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks for calling.
Yeah.
7th and KRV, Pete Kahn from McAllen. Thanks for calling.
Hey, Doug. First, your listeners really need to get a hold of this book, Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Alain Pape.
Oh, big deal. Just tell me what's in it so I can refute every...
He quotes verbatim the Ben Gurion diaries and the Israeli Defense Force war diaries.
Oh, will you spare me? They're trying to gain a country, all right? Let's talk to issues and stop with the garbage, all right? Let's knock it off.
First,
let's talk to issues.
Okay, back around 1900, the Zionist movement started talking about relocating.
Why?
Why they wanted to throw the existing population out.
Why? What's going on in Europe that makes the Jews want to have their own country?
Well, in Vienna, 2 out of 3 doctors were Jewish.
All right, that's enough. I'm not going to talk anymore. And where are they today? And where are the Jews of Germany today? And where are the Jews of Poland today? If you want to talk nonsense, go talk to the mirror. If you got something to say, then say it.
I'm saying the other.
Where are the Jews? Where are the Jews of Germany today? Where are the Jews of Poland?
In 1972, the CIA did a survey of the Palestinian refugee camps.
And
they asked them, would you take a monetary settlement for the land you lost in Israel? 65% of them said yes, they would.
They never had any land of Israel.
Yes, they did.
No, they didn't. There was no land. They have no land. There's nobody talking about what they had no land. The Ottomans owned the land.
That is flat out not true.
All right, Pete. You either answer the question or get off the line. All right?
Now, the thing, let me...
Who owned the land? Who was in possession of the Middle East in 1900?
In 1900, about 90% of it was owned by Palestinians locally.
Even in Turkey?
The Ottoman Empire ran the place, yes.
So the Palestinians own land in Turkey?
No, but they own land in Palestine.
Nate, what's a Palestinian? Describe a Palestinian to me. What is a Palestinian?
Somebody who lives in the area south of Lebanon. Actually, the whole place was part of Greater Syria. That's what they referred to themselves as.
Oh, so they're not. There's no such thing as a Palestinian.
No, there is, because it was a subdivision.
Really?
Like we talk about.
Well, let me ask you:
Texas.
Is there any distinction between a Jordanian Arab and a Palestinian Arab?
Yes.
What's the distinction?
One, the Jordanians were primarily Bedouin, where the Palestinians were farmers.
Farmers? What ethnicity is farmers? I didn't know there was an ethnicity called farmers.
The difference was,
no, I'm talking about ethnicity, for gosh sakes. Aren't they all the same? Aren't they all genetically the same? They're all Arabs.
They all spoke Arabic.
Oh, you can speak Arabic and not be Arab. Aren't they all from the same origins, the Arabian Peninsula? Didn't they all come at the same time?
No. You've had.
Didn't they all come at the same time?
No.
When did they come? When did the first Arabs set foot?
Who were the Canaanites?
When they were not Arabs.
Well, who were they?
I don't know who they were. I don't know if anyone knows who they were.
They were there.
Wait a minute.
And you had the
Where did the Arabs come from?
When
did the Arabs come from? When did the Arabs arrive in the Middle East?
Prehistory, and they kept coming.
When did the Arabs arrive in the Middle East, according to all historical documentation?
I have no idea, but it was thousands of years ago, about at least the same time that...
You don't know what you're talking about. The Arabs came out of the Arabian Peninsula in 7th century A.D.
That is not true.
That is true.
Now, let's get back to the CIA survey.
No, I'm not going to talk about... I'm not talking...
This shows where the problem is.
No, I don't...
The CIA, the U.S. government took this thing to the Israelis and said, look, we've got the basis for it.
It's not true.
And the Israelis turned
Why
it down.
not true? It's not true.
You can check it. It was in the
Economist. Check it. You don't know when the Arabs showed up there, and you want me to check into a CIA document. What did Ehud Barak offer to Yasser Arafat and the Palestinians? What did he offer them?
A rump semi-state.
95. All he refused to give them was what? Eastern Jerusalem. Is that not correct? Everything else, they were going to.
That is their capital, and you've got the mosque
Their capital.
there.
When was Jerusalem ever a capital of any nation except Israel?
It would be the logical. It's one of the holiest places of not only the Jews,
of the Buddhists,
Christians, and the Muslims.
Of the Buddhists.
No, I said
happened?
The three religions.
How was Jerusalem managed under the control of the Arabs? Were the Jews allowed to go to the Wailing Wall or to Eastern Jerusalem?
You had a war.
You had a war?
Had a war where you had.
What war was that exactly? I'm talking about before.
It was an ongoing war from the truce in 49.
Who initiated the war?
67.
Who initiated the war in 1947? Who initiated the war? Who launched the attacks?
If you look at where all the battles were fought, they were all fought on land that was supposed to be in the Arab sectors.
Who did not want an Arab country? Who refused? Which group refused to accept a nation by the United Nations? Did not the Jews of Israel accept the partition offered by the United Nations? Was it not the Arabs who refused to go along? Was it not the Arabs who attacked the Jews?
Because
it not the Arabs who attacked the Jews?
No, it wasn't.
All right, Pete, that's it for you. Okay. I'm not going to put up with any of that. Of course it was. 5 Arab armies led by British officers attacked Israel where there were which had no army. All this garbage from all these pseudos that think they know something about history or know something about anything. The purpose of history is to learn. It is not a question of dates so much or peoples or places. History is to learn by the actions of human beings. Human beings all have the same psychology, the same psychological makeup. We have our emotions. We have our jealousies and envies. The objects of those jealousies and envies may change, but but we're all the same. Therefore, in a situation, one can predict, based upon human psychology, the behavior of individuals in a certain environment. The facts are the facts, and all of this labyrinth of historical opinion does not alter the underlying fact. The question in the Middle East is one of intolerance. It is not a question of land, because the amount of land Israel owns, 8,000 square miles, is nothing. I think Saudi Arabia has 500,000 square miles of land. Iran has 300,000 square miles of land. Egypt has at least 10 times the amount of land, if not more, as Israel does. The history there is long and complicated, and you can point fingers at everyone. But the bottom line is self-defense requires violence. And that's what self-defense is. It is violence against violence. And if you cannot distinguish between a constitutional democratic republic like Israel, where the people are free and the women are treated equally as men, and you cannot distinguish between that and a despotism that is in Jordan or Syria or in Lebanon or in Saudi Arabia or anywhere else in the Middle East and the surrounding countries. If you cannot distinguish between the two, then there's really no point of it, because you are no different than the Nazis who said some people are superior and other people are inferior. And you are no different than the person who says that the in utero infant is not a human being. You are exactly what that person is, and you may not admit to it, but that's exactly what you are. So you're a closet anti-Semite, and that's all there is to it. And you try to shroud your anti-Semitism in this verbiage of justice and equal and even-handedness, and you haven't got a leg to stand on. So, and You're exactly the kind of people who say, well, I'm really sorry all those Jews got killed over there, but I didn't kill any of them. And that's exactly the rationale you're using. The Arabs in the Middle East have only one goal, and that is to kill Jews. That is why they kill Jews all around the world and not just in Israel. Why are they killing Jews in India? Why do they kill Jews in France? Why do they kill Jews in Argentina? If it's a Palestinian issue and a Middle Eastern issue, why do Muslims, and Arab Muslims particularly, kill Jews in Europe and in India and in South America? What do they have to do with it if it is a land issue and not an issue of intolerance? 710 KRV Talk Back, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home there on microphone, 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK. And we'll be back after this break. We're back. 710 KRV Talk Back, Dr. Lawrence Gelman. I think I'm going to finish with that stuff. 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK. Okay, we'll take this call. 710 KRV, Sam calling from San Benito. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, this is Sam from San Benito. Hey, good morning, Dr. Gelman. How are you today?
Fine, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I was listening to the show previous to yours, and I was kind of thrown off by what they were saying, and they sounded like very, learned people or that supposedly have done their research. But where I always learned to discern as to what's what is that, in 70 A.D. when the Romans went into Jerusalem and took over things, it wasn't the Palestinians who were mentioned historically. It was the people that they threw out were Jews. It was the people of Israel, the Hebrew people that they dispersed. And so all this other stuff about that's where I I don't understand. History is history, and you can't change history. And these people that bring up this other side about Palestine, it's my understanding. I'm not a historian, but it's my understanding that even the word Palestine and Palestinian, or actually Palestine, was brought about by someone from the Roman Empire, trying to rename the area. It was always the land of Israel, and Israel goes back to Jacob. I mean, Jacob and his 12 sons of the 12 tribes of Israel. I mean, it's not never the land. I never. I mean, I don't know where they get all this other history from. But thank you for being on the air, because it's good to see different points of view. That's what freedom of speech is, and freedom of expression. But anyway, the truth always comes through, though. So thank you for your show. And anyway, I'm not a historian, but I enjoy your show, and I can't debate with you about historical issues or debate with anybody else, or at least take it to a more deeper level. But go ahead,
Sam. History is written by the victors. Okay, so how accurate the events of history are is always open to question. However, What is not open to question is human behavior, because human behavior has always been the same and will always be the same because we're humans. You can predict how a tiger is going to act in a certain situation, and you can predict how human beings are going to behave in a certain situation. And so I mean, don't belittle yourself because you don't know the places, names, and dates of historical events, because that's not really what's significant. The purpose about learning history, the point of learning history, is to understand human behavior so that you can predict what might happen under a certain set of circumstances. That is the reason you learn. But most historians, like the so-called individuals that were here before, they don't know anything about human behavior. They are isolated and prejudiced, and they're ignorant, and they have a certain point of view that they try to justify. But the fact of the matter is, Sam, that one of the things that the so-called experts use against you is that they say, well, you don't have a PhD in history, or you're not a lawyer, or something like that. Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I know more about the Constitution than any lawyer I've ever spoken to, and certainly more about the Constitution than members of the Supreme Court. And I'm going to be talking about that in a little while. So, but right and wrong is right and wrong. And anyone that can defend Arab Muslims in their slaughter of innocent men, women, and children for no other reason than that they're Jewish, if you can get up there and defend that, then that person has a problem, and I don't care how many letters they have after their name. So thanks a lot for calling, Sam. I appreciate it. Now we have Kevin. Wait, what is this? This one over here? Kevin in Far, I guess. 79 KRB, TalkBack, Dr. Lawrence Gelman. Thanks for calling.
Thank you. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Say, I've taught Middle Eastern studies off and on for a number of years, and I personally try to focus on the Israeli side of the issue, especially in regards to the nature of Palestine. And I know that it's not such a one-sided view. I mean, there are plenty of different options politically and on the ground. People there in Israel have worked there plenty of times. You know, any direction you look, any place you go, you're going to find 9, 10 different opinions, even among the Israeli population. And I was just wondering, I had a couple questions for you.
Yeah.
Because I heard you say on your show that basically Israel just kind of you said they've existed for 3,000 years. Then you said in 1948 they came into being.
No,
and,
the state was came into being, recreated, United Nations.
Okay. So the United Nations, they offered, but they did offer a two-state solution,
yes.
2 parts of the land, right?
Yes, they did.
Okay, that was 1947, and the UN Commission offered that, and historically it was the Arab nations around, like the nation of Egypt, the nation of Jordan, the Arab nations that you're referring to. They're the ones who rejected it, not Palestinians. There was no Palestinian representation to accept it or reject it at that point. In fact, the Israeli government that was at that point that was in charge, they didn't accept it either. They just let everybody else reject it, and then they were on good graces with everyone because they didn't have to say anything.
Who was on the good graces?
Well, they were in good graces in the sense that they weren't against the UN.
Wait, who's in the good graces?
The state of the pre-state of Israel.
Oh, really? Let me ask you this: when Israel was formed through that UN mandate, supposedly, which was from 1918, by the way.
That was the Balfour Declaration.
Who launched who? Who launched attack against who? Who attacked whom?
In 1948?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Israel in 1948, before it was the nation state of Israel, in the spring of 48, before May 14th. They were doing all kinds of warlike activity within what is now the state of Israel.
Who was?
Israel.
They don't even. Yeah. There was an embargo. They were fighting. They were fighting the British. They were fighting the British.
No, they weren't. Well,
they weren't.
No,
they weren't.
Back down in 47. In 48,
they were fighting the British. And
no.
Yes, the British hung
Not in
Jewish.
48.
The British led the Arab legions, if you're not aware of it.
Oh, I'm very aware of that. That's World War I, though.
I'm talking about 1948.
No,
the British.
Sorry. The Arab Legion wasn't in what is Israel or what is the West Bank or Gaza.
Who attacked whom? Was there a Jewish army? Was there a Jewish Air Force? Was there
nobody had an air force in the Middle East at that time except for the dominant.
Was there not
powers.
An embargo on weapons going for Jews into Israel only against Jews and not against Arabs?
Well, there was no embargo that was favoring one side against the other.
You got to be. What are you kidding me?
No,
you say you've learned. What are you talking about? Why don't you go look there? The United States itself prevented arms shipments from going to Israel even after the creation of the state. That okay.
Is true, but
whereas the Arabs were armed actively.
They had an embargo against anyone. But see, but we're talking about the creation of the state. As I said, the Yishuv government, which was there, they were very well armed.
Who was very well armed?
It's historically, absolutely untenable to hold your position. Benny Morris, the National Archivist for the State of Israel today, absolutely agrees with that.
With what?
His work, I'm relying.
That they were very well armed?
Israeli Jewish position. Okay. Ilan Pape is another Israeli historian.
That means absolutely nothing. That means nothing. Some of the look.
What's that?
What does that mean? Israeli historian? Do you think that lends to credibility?
Absolutely.
Really?
Of course it does.
So when Golda
wasn't it Israeli
Meir,
historians
hang on
you
a
weren't
second.
listening to?
So when Golda Meir sided with the British in enforcing the white paper, even though she's an Israeli Jew, what do you think that gives her legitimacy because she's a Jewish or became a prime minister, or that the Jews of Palestine or that the Jewish consuls in Poland and in Hungary handed over their Jewish brothers and sisters to Nazi occupiers and murderers? And
No, you're confusing issues.
no, I'm not
purposely.
confusing you. You saw it brought forth just because this is an Israeli Jew historian, that somehow gives him credibility. Well, it does not.
So Benny Morris is incredible. Okay. The government of Israel thinks he is. The point here.
The government of Israel, the government of Israel has its whatever agenda it is.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter, look, if you're telling me, I just want to be clear on this issue. You're telling me it wasn't the Arabs who launched the war against Israel in 1947-48. You're saying
after the declaration of the State of Israel on May 14th,
yeah,
there were Arab countries that invaded Israel. That's true.
All right.
They came because, as in 1947, they had already decided that there wouldn't be, and they didn't want, and there shouldn't be a nation state of Israel.
Why? Why didn't they want it? Why didn't they want a nation state of Israel?
Why didn't they want that? Well, I know
why?
what your answer is, but the point is because
Well,
it
what's
was
your
a construct
answer?
from outside.
What's your
Because
answer?
it was something it was a colonial construct from outside. They were told what was going to happen. That was it.
Oh, I
They
see.
were
And who
there
gave
on
the Arabs?
ground in 36
How did
when
the Arabs?
British-
How did the Arabs gain?
British-
How did the Arabs gain possession of Jordan and Syria and Lebanon and
the same
Egypt?
way Israel came into possession of the state of Israel.
But you don't
The
have any. You
colonial
don't have any
powers
problem with
after
that.
World War, what's that?
You don't have any problem with that.
Well, look, that's an unfortunate part of colonial history.
So, but you don't have any problem with that. You only have a problem with Israel being formed. You don't have a problem with the other countries
that's
being
not true.
formed.
I didn't say that. I did not.
Well,
say
what
that.
are you saying then?
I said very clearly that Israel is born just like the other colonial states in the Middle East.
So
Okay?
why don't you? Why? So let's talk about Egypt. Should we give the Egypt back to the Ottomans, to the Ottoman Turks?
Well, you're talking about an era. See, this is an easy confusion of categories right there. You want to talk about
It's all
things that
created at the
happened
same
before.
time. We're talking. Yes.
Ottoman
In
Empire
1918, 1920,
imploded in
1922. 1922.
The Ottoman Empire, 1922.
Right.
The Ottoman Empire imploded because they couldn't support themselves anymore.
Imploded. They
especially
lost the
after World War
war.
I.
They lost the war.
That's right.
Okay.
And then they lost their own civil war, and it was Turks themselves who stood up against the Ottoman Empire. This is what happens to empires over and over. So why would you give Egypt back to an entity that doesn't exist?
Palestinians don't exist.
They sure do.
No, they don't. Show me where. Name me. Show me when there's a Show me anywhere historically where there's ever been a country called Palestine.
There's all. If you want to define a country as a nation state,
all right, nation state. Any nation state.
Until 1948 either.
Israel existed as a nation state prior to 1948, did it not?
No.
Historically, never, never.
As a nation state, no.
Never.
Nation state
Goodbye. All right. Now we have. Well, that was interesting. I didn't know that Israel never existed as a nation state before. So who was King David, King Solomon, who were they exactly? And the capital of Jerusalem. Well, capital of what? Well, that's. I'm glad this is the people that we have teaching history. Now we have. I tell you, it's like talking. I'm telling you, it's the same. This is the same kind of conversation I have when I talk about people who are pro-choice. It's interesting. Their lack of logic, their lack of information, their bias, and their closed-mindedness. Incredible. No nation state of Israel before 1948. Well, that would be news to King David, I imagine. Anyway, we have Edward calling from Edinburgh, 7KURV. Thanks for calling.
Dr. Gelman, good morning, sir.
Morning.
I have a quick question. If I understood you correctly, other times I've heard you say that Bill Clinton was anti-Semitic. You've characterized him as being anti-Semitic.
Yes.
Yet I was wondering if you could clarify this point. Bill Clinton brought together, if I recall correctly, Yasser Arafat and
Bill Clinton brought in Yasser Arafat.
Rabin,
right, and how does that make him not anti-Semitic?
If I may finish my question, he brought them together at the Oslo Accords. They came together at Camp David.
Yeah, no, Camp David is Jimmy Carter.
Excuse me, sir. And they even won the Nobel Peace Prize for their work.
So did Menachem Begin, Yasser Arafat. So I mean, so what?
I'm just asking. You've described Bill Clinton as being anti-Semitic.
Yeah, and his wife too.
And I just thought, I'm asking for an explanation if he's working for peace between the.
He's not working for peace. What working for peace? He was taking the Arab side. The Israelis have the upper hand over there. All of these so-called peace accords are an attempt to give land to the Arabs.
And to Pete, the caller before, I'd just like to ask him to justify why Hamas is bombing Israel with rockets. And there seems to me like Pete taking an anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist or whatever, anti-Jewish position. How does he reconcile Hamas bombing Israel with rockets?
Well, you'll have to ask him.
Yes, sir. All right, thank you, sir.
Thanks for calling. Anybody else here? Well, there you have it. I mean, Bill Clinton is. I mean, most northeastern Anglos are racist and elitist to begin with. So I mean, what the heck? That's just the way it is. And I just want to reiterate the point that just because you're Jewish doesn't make you pro-Israel, doesn't make you legitimate. And they try to. So you have these Jewish authors who are really in it only for themselves, for their own recognition to become famous. But unfortunately, the Jews of Europe have sold out their fellow Jews. The Jews that lived in the Middle East sold out their fellow Jews. Golda Meir and Ben Gurion turned over Jewish freedom fighters to the British to be killed. Ben Gurion tried to have Menachem Begin killed through a traitorous backstabbing circumstance. So, I mean, just because you're Jewish doesn't give you legitimacy as far as a point of view. The facts are the facts, and that's what you have to use. So it's a big topic, but it can be narrowed down in a nutshell into one thing. It's simply a question of intolerance. The Arabs are opposed to a state of Israel in the Middle East, not because of a land for peace issue, not because of Palestinians, and not because of anything along those lines. It is only for one reason, is that they hate the Jews. And that's all there is to it. And if you don't believe it, just ask them themselves. And so how can you create peace with people that hate you and only exist to kill you? I mean, how do you create, is there someone on the line here? Yeah, sure. What the heck? I don't have the name here. Okay, Kevin calls back. All right. 7 and Caribbean. Is this Kevin?
Yes, this is Kevin again.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to. The last caller asked something about how I would defend Hamas, and I wouldn't. I don't defend terrorism.
Well, no, I think he was asking Pete to defend Hamas. I don't think he was asking.
Oh, maybe he was asking about me. Okay.
He was asking Pete.
I wouldn't defend terrorism. Not at all. I mean, I think that's absolutely...
wasn't George Washington a terrorist in the eyes of the British?
Well, but that's the problem. People say one man's terrorist, another man's freedom
That's my
fighter.
point. That's right. Exactly right. So, I mean...
Well, and this goes along with what you were saying with both Ben Gurion and Menachem Begin. I mean, they use all kinds of terrorist activities, including the blowing
They use violence. They use violence.
Well, if a Hamas activist would bomb a hotel in Jerusalem, like the King David Hotel, you would call it terrorism.
No, it's violence.
Menachem Begin. Well, why isn't terrorism?
Well, define terror, because Menachem Begin, I consider Menachem Begin and the Irgun legitimate. So I mean, obviously, it's a pejorative term to call someone a terrorist that makes them sound like that they're intrinsically evil or wrong. I mean, that's why I say it. So that's why I bring up the point about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. They were considered terrorists that would be hung if captured. You know, not an enemy force, that would be put into prison, but they would be hung as traitors and terrorists. I'm just making that point that a country was created. I mean, the only reason that Jefferson and Washington and Adams lived to create a country is that they won the war. If they had lost the war, they would be hung as traitors and terrorists, and history would have been a big difference. So
that's exactly right.
So I mean, yes, Menachem Begin used violence against British and others because his motive. I agreed with his motive. So therefore, in my eyes, he's not a terrorist. He's a freedom fighter. Okay, and that's it. The action is the same.
Menachem Begin, Moshe Dayan, Yitzhak Rabin, Alon Alal, and all under orders of Ben Gurion.
No. Menachem Begin was never under orders of Ben Gurion. They were two separate issues. Ben Gurion tried to have. Yes, but Menachem Begin was the head of the Irgun.
That's right.
Two different organizations, and Ben Gurion tried to have Menachem Begin killed, and Ben. Huh?
That's correct. You're right.
And Ben Gurion had Irgun individuals arrested by the British that were eventually hung. So I mean, Menachem Begin was never under the orders of Ben Gurion. They were.
No, that's true. He was under Zev Jabotinsky, which was the Irgun.
He was dead by 1940. Jabotinsky was dead, and it is true that the philosophy of Menachem Begin follows that of Jabotinsky. That's true.
Absolutely.
And the creation of a state of Israel. Now, if you've ever read Jabotinsky's Wall of Iron, you'll see the philosophy. The philosophy, and he makes no bones about it. For him, and maybe alluding to your point, for him, it's not a question of who's right and who's wrong. It's a question of winning. Okay? It's a question of winning. And so, therefore, a debate.
But what are the methods and the tactics he espouses for winning? The
same that the revolutionaries did in the United States, and that every country has used in order to get the country that it lives in today. I mean, that's what country has not. What nation exists today that was not at one time conquered by a people dispossessing the people that were there, whether it's Italy or Austria or China or anywhere else?
I agree. No, I do agree that problems of genocide, dispossession, ethnic cleansing, these are problems that have existed for a while. They've only become
forever.
Front and center because of recent years, and the names comes out of Europe and the Balkans and all that.
But what about the genocide that occurred in Rwanda in '94?
Yeah, that's a great example. Who stood by and did nothing because they had no self-interest in the area?
The United States, among others.
The UN and the European Union, all three of them. They all had everything, every resource available to get in there and prevent it.
And they did nothing.
Because there's no oil. There's no reason to have any kind of...
And there's no justice in the hearts of a politician. Hey, I appreciate you calling back, Kevin, but I have to go to a break now. If you want to call back later, that's fine. But I have to go to a break now, and it's a long break because of the news and all that. So that's it for this hour, and I'm trying to get to what came in to talk about, which would be the Supreme Court decision of the Defense of Marriage Act. That's what I will talk about in the next hour. 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK. Be back after this break. .710 KRV TalkBack. Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of their microphone, streaming live on KURV.com, 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK. My website, talkbackonline.com. United States versus Windsor. The Supreme Court a few days ago came up with a couple of decisions. First one had to deal with the Civil Rights Act. What's amazing to me about the media and what I hear so often is the absolute refusal or inability of those in the media to explain exactly what's going on. And they talk and they talk and they talk and they say nothing. They're there to confuse and they misrepresent. And it's just a question of ignorance and arrogance, a combination of ignorance and arrogance. These people are so arrogant, they don't understand, they don't know anything, and therefore they're ignorant. But they think they can tell you what's going on. With the first decision about the Civil Rights, Voting Rights Act, it was very, very simple. The Voting Rights Act in 1965, I think it was, discriminated some states versus others. In other words, rules were applied to certain states that were not applied to all the states. If you want to apply the rules to all the states for federal elections, okay. But you can't make a legislation which constrains some states to a certain behavior and absolves others of the same behavior. That's all that decision was. The decision was that there were certain states, primarily in the South, that were under federal scrutiny for almost 50 years more than northern states, as if only the southern states have an issue and the northern states are somehow pristine. The southern states are evil and northern states are good. What a bunch of nonsense. The rules need to be applied across the board. And all that decision said was, and still a 5-4 decision, can you believe it? I mean, there are 4 justices on the Supreme Court that actually believe that the southern states ought to be treated differently by the federal government than the northern states. They actually believe that. This is what we have in the Supreme Court. What a bunch of ignoramuses. And that's all there was. People marching around talking about that. If you want to apply the rules, apply them across the board. If you're saying there are certain constraints about changing rules in federal votes, which is the only authority the federal government has over the states as far as voting, is in federal elections. And the federal government says these are some restrictions we're imposing on federal elections, then impose those on all the states equally and not just a group of states. And that's all it was. And they make a big deal out of that. Who can and apparently 4 justices justify that they can segregate and discriminate based on location. That because individuals living in some states somehow are going to be treated differently by the federal government than individuals living in other states. And there are people defending that. This is the government we have today. Now, the other issue I'm going to talk more in depth about is the United States versus Windsor, which was the Defense of Marriage Act deal. Well, let's get right down to it. First of all, the decision did not alter the legalized status of same-sex marriage. It had no effect on that, on a state level. In other words, every state is still has the capability or has the privilege of defining marriage and then enforcing that definition of marriage as far as all civil statutes. What the United States versus Windsor decision talked about was the understanding of same-sex marriage on the part of the federal government as regards to tax law. Right off the bat, tax law is unconstitutional, but we'll get past that for the moment. The federal government applies different standards of a state tax assessment, which is what this issue is all about, to married versus unmarried individuals. There's a higher tax assessment to to individuals who are not married than to individuals who are married. And because the federal government did not treat same-sex couples as married, they were under they fell under that stipulation. All this decision said was that the federal government itself, the federal government, not the state governments, that the federal governments would now look upon those who were married legally within a state, that they would now be treated by the federal government as a married couple, okay? In tax laws and any other federal type of situation, they would be treated as. So if a state like Texas does not legalize same-sex marriage, then that is not affected. If the state of Texas, if they're not married in the state of Texas, they're not married. Okay, if you're in the state of Texas, you live in the state of Texas, and you don't get married, the tax laws do not change. Okay, they only change if, like from California, if you are where same-sex marriage, well, no, not California, New York, where same-sex marriage is legal, where same-sex marriage is legal, and the situation in California is because the people came from another state. All right, so if a couple is married in a state which condones or accepts same-sex marriage, regardless of the state that they end up living in, even if they end up living in a state like California, which does not allow same-sex marriage for the time being, once they have been legally married somewhere, they now federally they are looked upon as a legal institution of marriage. They're referring to the Proposition 8 of California because it banned or would not allow same-sex marriage. So the issue, let's make it clear that this is not legal. This does not require states to allow same-sex marriage. It does not mean that. What it means is that where same-sex marriage is allowed, and for those that were married in states that allow same-sex marriage legally, and when it comes to federal law, the federal government will now look at that as a married couple the same way they looked at heterosexual couples as married couples. That's all it means. And I bet you no one explained it that way, did they? No one. I mean, it's just they called it a victory for gay rights. It's yes, it is in a sense, but it does not. People are perceiving it as an automatic blanket legalization of gay marriage throughout the United States. That is not what it is. Every state is still allowed to determine on its own whether same-sex marriage is going to be legal or not. Now, let's take a look at the decision itself and why it even came to this. The reason the decision was even picked up by the Supreme Court was to make a statement. It is not a decision that should have even gone to it was not an issue even should have gone to the Supreme Court. And in fact, there was really no argument in there. President Obama has already instructed the federal government or the state, the Attorney General, the Justice Department, not to enforce the Defense of Marriage Act. He's already told them that. What Obama did in a very circuitous, underhanded manner, Obama said we will not enforce the Defense of Marriage Act any longer, even though it's a federal law, which is kind of interesting because a federal law passed by the legislature, signed by the president, that the president now, a different president, was Bill Clinton, but still by executive branch. Now the president, the executive branch, says they're not going to enforce. Of course, the executive branch has no authority not to enforce legislation because the executive branch power is the power to execute federal law, and it's the executive is required to do so by the Constitution. Required to do so. Cannot just not do it. So right off the bat, but what Barack Obama did was, in order to create a case, said we're not going to defend the law any longer, but what we're going to do is on issues like the tax, specifically on the tax, we're not going to give a rebate to the the couple married under same-sex guidance rules. We're not going to give that woman her federal tax rebate. He did that specifically to create a conflict in order to bring this case before the Supreme Court. So Barack Obama specifically did an executive action which created a conflict arbitrarily by first saying we're not going to defend the law, but we're not going to overturn the stipulations of it along federal tax guidelines, thereby creating the case which went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court took the case, not legitimately, but of course they tried to construe it as such. The only reason they took the case was in order to allow the majority members to enunciate their personal viewpoint on same-sex marriage. That is the only reason that the case was taken. And their take on the Defense of Marriage Act and their take on same-sex marriage is simply this. They believe that same-sex marriage is as legitimate as heterosexual marriage, and they believe that the Defense of Marriage Act was not done except for sinister, the term used by Scalia, for sinister, or what they themselves say, what Justice Kennedy actually said in the decision. The Defense of Marriage Act seeks to injure the very class New York seeks to protect. By doing so, it violates basic due process and equal protection principles applicable to the federal government. Garbage. Nonsense. But it says basically all of you who believe that heterosexual marriage is the proper way of doing things, support the Defense of Marriage Act, not because of your beliefs, but because you want to injure those who have a different point of view. We have Carl Henderson calling from, the scurrilous Carl Henderson calling from, I don't know where.
From
okay,
McAllen,
710.
From
From McAllen.
Yeah,
Doesn't say on the screen. I know you're calling from, maybe you were calling from San Juan. I don't know. All right.
I'm calling about some of the comments that were made earlier about everything that occurs is just violence. There's a big difference between.
I didn't say everything that occurs. Wait. I didn't. What do you mean everything I didn't say everything that occurs is violence.
When you guys were talking and you were defining terms, you were saying it's all violence. There's a big difference between murder and self-defense. Both are violence, but one is justified, the other one is not.
Oh yeah. Well, time out. You will talk as long as you want. Time out.
Okay.
Who defines murder? Who defines murder?
The law.
The law.
God.
All right.
The unlawful.
Wait a second. No. The law defines murder. Unless you live in a theocracy, the secular law defines murder. Let's take a step back. Is the killing of the in utero infant in the United States murder today?
The killing of who?
The in utero undelivered infant.
Yes, it's murder.
It is? Then
By
why? Then
law,
how can there be
by
abortion clinics?
definition-
How can there be abortion clinics?
Again, if you want to talk, we're talking about.
You can't
moral
make
law,
up your
we're
own
talking
law.
about
No,
common law,
look,
we're talking about.
We're talking about in the United
principles.
States. In the United States, is the killing of the undelivered infant legal, at least in some circumstances?
It is legal, but it's not. But it is not.
What defines murder?
What defines murder is
Yeah.
law and the principles behind law. So if the laws are wrong, that does not make them suddenly.
You can't
murder
come up
no
with your
longer murder.
opinion. No, look,
This is how
you
Hitler
can't make
killed
up. You
6
can't
million
make up
people.
your own opinions. Okay. No, the fact of
No,
the matter
law-
is, in the United States, that the killing of the undelivered infant is not, under most circumstances, considered murder. It is considered justifiable homicide. Yes.
Not if you assault someone who has a baby inside.
Wait
them,
a
the baby
second.
dies, you
That's
committed
another
murder.
that's another issue. I'm talking about if a woman goes into an abortion clinic at 10 weeks gestational age, and has the abortionist kill her infant, is that murder in the United States?
She will not be prosecuted by. In the
Okay,
United
so
States.
murder.
Is it still murder? Yes, it's the unlawful.
You can't be
taking of a
doing
life.
that. It's not unlawful. It's legal. You can't apply your definition of law. You may have your moral guidelines. Can we keep our minds clear? Obviously, I'm opposed to the in utero.
This is what I was trying. You're digressing by changing.
I
topics.
am not. I'm trying to define what murder is.
What I was
You're
trying to point out to you is you had the discussion earlier where they said, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. There's a huge difference between a freedom fighter and a terrorist. Just
No,
as
there
there's a
isn't.
difference between terrorism
No, there
and
isn't.
war. Yes,
Tell
there
me
is.
the
Will
tell
you
me the
allow
distinction.
Will you allow me to define it for you?
Well, you
allow me to
failed. You
define it for
failed
you?
miserably to define the other one. Go ahead and define this. Go ahead and define it.
Taking.
Define it.
If you're going to talk about moral principles, you're going to talk about legal principles. I'm talking.
We're
about
talking legal.
the difference
Look,
between-
just hang.
the
No, you
difference
cannot.
between a
Will you
terrorist-
not? Will you
the
stop it for a
difference between
second?
a terrorist and a freedom fighter.
Murder is a legal term. It is a legal term. Murder, legal. Okay, it's a legal term. It means unjustified killing.
It is
No,
a moral.
no, that is not what it means. It means
The legal term is based upon a moral principle.
it is not true. It is not
Okay,
true.
So when Hitler changes the law, we
Can we
kill
stick
6
with the
million
United
people 'cause it's
States?
no
Can we
longer-
stick with the
it's no
United
longer
States?
Murder.
Can-
What you're saying is Hitler didn't commit murder because it was not murder to kill Jews. I say it's murder no matter what the law said.
Well, it doesn't matter what you
The
say.
law-
You don't
the law is
have
wrong. As a
authority over the law.
As a libertarian, you know that if
Well,
the law
what
is
are we
wrong,
talking about?
It's wrong.
We're sticking
the
to
law does not make something right.
Okay, then
If
why
the law
don't you?
is wrong, it's wrong.
Okay, so can you? Okay, so you're an abortion clinic and a woman has
so
an
my
undelivered
definition-
infant
I
killed.
want to talk
Why don't
about
you
the
call the
difference
police?
between a
Why
terrorist
don't you call
and
the
a freedom
police?
fighter.
You
The
haven't
difference between a
distinguished
terrorist and a
accurately.
freedom fighter.
Look,
A freedom fighter attacks a government or the government logistics in order to win a war.
Right.
A terrorist kills the innocent to drive them from the land or to get notoriety.
Where did you come up with where did you come up where did you come up with that definition?
Between
wait a second.
guerrilla and
wait a second.
and
Will you
terrorism.
just wait a second? That's not the definition of terrorist. You made that up. That's not the definition of a terrorist. Terrorist is not one that kills innocent people to drive them from the land. That's not what a terrorist is. A terrorist is essentially a terrorist as defined is non-government sanctioned violence in an organized manner. That's what terrorism is.
Governments commit terrorism all the time.
They can't if they're a government.
Terrorism in Nazi Germany, the government.
That's not terrorism. That is not terrorism. Look,
yes, it is.
It is not. You cannot apply your definitions. You cannot apply your definition.
To drive the Jewish people out.
You
and
cannot
get them to agree.
You cannot
and give up their property.
You cannot use your personal definition of terrorism. All right. What the Nazi government did was not terrorism if it was done within their system of laws.
Are you saying it wasn't murder? Are you saying it wasn't murder because it was the Jewish?
If it was murder, why weren't the Nazis put in jail, the Germans put in jail when they were killing Jews? If it was murder. Murder means it's against the law. Was it against the law in Germany to kill Jews?
There is a higher law than the written law,
look,
and that's the moral law. All law is based on morality.
You don't have the capacity to define moral law. You have your morality. You cannot impose your morality on anyone else.
Between self-defense and murder. And you can't say everything's violence. You can't say Jewish terrorism or Palestinian terrorism or Muslim terrorism isn't terrorism.
It isn't.
Terrorism, whether it's the
there's no such thing.
The Muslims or whether it's the early Jewish state. Terrorism is still Jewish. It's still terrorism.
That's a nice slip of the tongue. Terrorism is still Jewish. I guess I see your true heart in that one.
No, what I'm trying to do is talk fast enough to get ahead of you.
You let us slip through. You let us slip through. Just the way that Pete let his anti-Semitism slip through.
Freudian slip. This week.
You know why they call it a Freudian slip? Do you know why they call it a Freudian slip? Why do you suppose they call it a Freudian slip? Why do you suppose?
Muslim terrorists.
Why do you suppose? Wait, Carl.
By that act itself.
Carl, why do you suppose they call it a Freudian slip? Why do they call it a Freudian slip? What does it mean? They have a Freudian slip.
I don't buy a lot of things Freud says.
But what do they mean by Freudian slip?
Dr. Gelman,
Freudian slip means Freudian slip means you let your inadvertently you allow your true feelings to come out. That's a Freudian slip. Now explain to me.
Are we doing psychology or are we doing conversation? No, you've never misspoken in your life, Dr. Gelman?
Yes, I have, but maybe inadvertently I'm letting slip what I really believe, maybe inadvertently. But okay, so how
my point.
Yeah, what's your point?
Is this.
Yeah.
It is not justified violence when you kill innocent people.
Wait a minute. Who defines innocent? Who defines innocent?
Non-combatants are defined as innocent.
So really? So wait a second. Wait a second. Wait a second. So a judge that condemns a Jew to a concentration camp, what's that?
What are you getting at? I don't understand what you're trying to say.
What's that? I mean, is that innocent? I mean, he's not committing direct violence.
Yes, direct violence against an innocent person.
What violence was that? So that's terrorism? So the judge that condemned a Jew to a concentration camp, is that terrorism? Legally speaking, is that terrorism?
You don't believe that a state can be a terrorist state?
Legally, no. They make the laws.
Okay,
I mean, they make the laws.
I don't understand how you can be a libertarian and still believe that a communist or a Nazi or a Muslim extremist or any other violent state or government can make laws that include killing other people and then turn around and say it's not murder.
Because you don't understand. You don't understand the distinction.
The law says.
But there's your problem. The law is murder is a legal term, and therefore you have to be constrained by the legality of it. Now, you can say Germany, if the Nazis of Germany killed Jews within the country under their law, that's legal. If the Nazis invade another country against the rule of nations, then for no other reason than to conquer, then that is terrorism, okay? But so, yes, that is.
If they destroy the other government's military and they attack the military, that's warfare. It's when they destroy the civilians, when they butcher and starve.
Really? Did the United States bomb civilians in Japan and Britain and Germany? Purposely attack civilian cities? Did they? Did the United States do that?
It was wrong. It was wrong.
So you're saying it was illegal? Was that illegal?
Yeah, mass murder of people in Dresden and different places like that.
Tokyo, Nagasaki, Hiroshima. Was that illegal?
In the laws of warfare, attacking civilian targets is always considered wrong.
So it's illegal. It's murder.
Yeah, but when
murder.
When you win, whether you're a Nazi or an American, you get to make the rules, right? And
wait a minute, that's my. So you're saying the winners make the rules, okay? The government makes the rules. The government decides what's legal and not legal. The government decides what's murder or not murder. You're saying that the only reason that Roosevelt and Truman were not in the docket in Nuremberg was because we won the war. If the Germans had won the war, it would have been Truman who had been sitting there and going to be hanged, right?
That's right, but it's still wrong no matter who wins the war.
I don't understand why we cannot reach an understanding here that there's a distinction between right and wrong and legal and illegal. There is a distinction, right? We do. I hope we understand that there is a difference between right and wrong and legal and illegal. But we may not agree that something is legal. We may consider what is legal as murder. You and I may agree on that, but it doesn't make it so. We cannot, just because we believe the killing of the undelivered infant is murder, doesn't make it murder in the eyes of the law. If it did, they would go to jail. Okay? So murder is in the eyes of the beholder, as is terrorism. Is in the eyes of the beholder. And don't the Arabs say that themselves? Don't they call their individuals freedom fighters? They don't call Arafat a terrorist, do they?
See there, Dr. Gelman? Dr. Gelman, this is what I'm trying to tell you. It doesn't matter how we define it. The fact is, if you're killing innocent, you're committing
Define
murder,
innocent.
No matter who wins.
Define innocent. Everybody calls themselves innocent. The Germans thought they were innocent. The Japanese thought they were innocent.
Person who sets off a bomb in a bus in Jerusalem and kills 28 or 30 people. Those 28 or 30 people are innocent.
How do you know they're innocent? Not in the eyes of the person who set off the bomb. Don't you understand? If he thought they were innocent, they wouldn't have set off the bomb. The person who set off the bomb thought they were guilty of something. That person didn't think.
No,
and isn't that? Aren't those persons honored?
No. Again, he's using.
What do you mean? No, they're honored.
Terrorism to bring notoriety and to bring attention to his cause.
You cannot.
He also
look.
Knows,
if you're going to be
in his heart that he's killing innocent people.
If you're going to be that's your definition. And I keep going around the same circles. If you're not, look, okay, I appreciate you calling, but I'm not going to keep going around in the same circles. You cannot define, nor I cannot define what is legal and illegal. We cannot define what is murder.
So nobody can know right or wrong.
That's not what I'm saying. We have our own personal beliefs, but our own personal beliefs may not coincide. Our own personal beliefs do not coincide.
All laws are based on moral principle. That's
not true.
Of the principle.
What about laws of communism? Well, will you give me a break? What moral principle did the communists use in the Soviet Union? What was their moral? Okay, tell me what. They have laws, right? They were a country, a nation of laws.
You're the one
what was their laws?
They did was lawful.
What were their laws?
It was always murder. It was always evil.
So in your mind, that's it. I mean, I don't understand it. It's a question of logic and understanding. The laws are made by governments in a country, and they define what is murder or what is legal and illegal based upon whatever guidelines they want to use. You and I may all have our own personal opinions about different things, and that's not to say there isn't a right and a wrong. There are right and wrongs, clearly, but we have governments that exist performing acts which we consider wrong, which are considered legal, perfectly legal. Though everyone considers themselves innocent and justified. Everybody, everyone considered, all the Nazis thought they were justified, thought what they did was legal and right. The Nazis thought that what they were doing was right. They thought they were improving civilization. If we're unable to have a discussion where we understand definitions, terrorism is not using violence to get people off land. That is not what terrorism is. Terrorism has a definition, and terrorism is the violence, a non-violence in organized form, not performed by an organized state. In other words, independent of a state. A state can commit violence against another country. That's called war. And we can call it terrorism or not terrorism. The fact of the matter is the Germans who attacked Poland certainly did not consider themselves terrorists. They considered themselves liberators. When the Germans took over Czechoslovakia, they considered themselves liberators. When they took over Austria, they considered themselves liberators. And if you look at the people in Austria that were cheering and jumping up and down, my gosh, the people seem to be liberated. Is this absurd reliance on individual opinion in which we are, have a little bit of insight. I understand, I have a point of view, but I certainly do understand, and I try to defend my opinion, which are many facts as I possibly can. But when people consider their opinion to be fact, that's where you have a problem. You cannot apply your morality to what is legal and illegal. In your personal life, you can try to do so, not always successfully. But you certainly, your opinion as to what is legal and illegal does not determine what is legal and illegal in society. I cannot go and arrest or do a citizen's arrest or call the police on someone performing abortions, even though I consider that illegal, and it should be illegal, is definitely immoral, and is murder in my eyes, but not in the eyes of the state. So if I call the cops on an abortionist, they're going to arrest me. So 7th and KRB, talk by Dr. Lawrence Gelman. Back after this short break, I want to return to the Defense of Marriage Act. Only so much time in the day. Defense of Marriage Act, United States versus Windsor, does not require legalization of same-sex marriage in the United States. All it does, it says that under federal, now in regards to federal law and federal statutes and federal regulations, that any couple that has been married legally within a state that permits same-sex marriage, that the federal government will now treat that couple federally as they treat heterosexual couples. In this particular case, the issue was estate tax law, which discriminates between a single person and a married couple. And now this is a federal law, the federal estate tax. And therefore, now the federal government will apply heterosexual marriage rules to those married legally in those states where it's legal, same-sex marriage. Even if the same-sex marriage, even if they reside in a state other than the state they were married in legally. As long as they were married in one state, in a state that at the time of the marriage said it was legal, then regardless of the state they end up in, they will follow federal guidelines. In regards to federal law exclusively, which the Supreme Court said, doesn't matter what they say because it's baloney anyway, the federal government has no authority as to defining marriage within a state. Therefore, and that lack of authority is supported in a 5-4 decision, which is a real question why four people think that the federal government can determine the marriage laws in a state. Let me make another quick comment here. Civil rights and gay rights. If a state defines a marriage in a certain way, anyway, then they have to apply that definition of marriage across. And if a state says a marriage between a heterosexual and between a man and a woman, then race cannot enter the issue. that is a violation of federal law. That is a violation of rights. You can't do that. There's a distinction between laws which prevented a marriage between different races, couples of different races. There's a distinction between that and the prevention of those of the same sex getting married. There's a big difference. You are born your race. You are born black, white, brown, whatever. You are as the behavior, sexual behavior is behavioral, independent of birth. It's something that you do voluntarily, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual, whatever. It's voluntarily done. It is not something that is involuntary. Okay, you're born black, white, brown, whatever. That is involuntary. Sexual behavior, regardless, is voluntary, and there's a distinction. So there's a difference. You cannot punish someone or segregate someone based upon ethnicity, color, or where you're something that you is not voluntary. If it's voluntary, sexual behavior is voluntary. Maybe you got impulses one way or the other, but the bottom line is it's not a forced behavior, unless it's rape, I guess. It's voluntary. The Supreme Court decision was done for no other reason. The Supreme Court wanted to impose its view of the majority upon society, stating that same-sex marriage is as legitimate as heterosexual marriage. In the decision, the majority opinion said, Defense of Marriage Act seeks to injure the very class New York seeks to protect. By doing so, it violates basic due process and equal protection principles. Constitution's guarantee of equality must at the very least mean that a bare congressional desire to harm a politically unpopular group cannot justify disparate treatment of that group. Okay, look. Society sets its norms. And in our society, the norm has always been that marriage is between a man and a woman, a heterosexual marriage. Now, what is a perversion? A perversion is simply doing something to or with an object that is not its intended function. That's perversion. So if you look at the sexual activity, that your organs have a particular purpose. Okay, I mean the uterus has a purpose, and so there are and that purpose is to procreate. And there's certain mechanisms which lead to procreation. That is its intended activity. So if you're doing sexual activity on organs that are not for other than their intended use, that's a perversion. Now, heterosexuals commit perversions on that definition. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's not like the heterosexuals don't do, by definition, what may be considered a perversion. However, the definition of homosexual sexual activities is by definition perversion. And so society has decided that they're not going to accept that, at least used to be. The same way that we don't accept pedophilia as legitimate. Pedophilia is considered perversion. The sex with a child, whatever, however you define a child. Sex with a minor, however you define a minor. Sex between an adult and someone underage, however you can define adult and underage. But pedophilia is, they say, is an urge which cannot be controlled, is what pedophiles say. And but that doesn't make it correct or acceptable or that it should be accepted. And this is important distinctions. We consider pedophilia as perversions. Bestiality is considered a perversion. So I mean, a perversion. Obviously, sex between a human being and an animal is not intended, is doing with organs, behavior outside intended function. action outside intended function, treating an object outside of intended function. That is the definition of perversion. That's not my definition of perversion. That is the definition of perversion. So heterosexuals do commit perversions in their sexual activity. No one is doubting that. But heterosexual sexual behavior is not based on perversion. Homosexual sexual activity is based on perversion. And society has decided that that is not going to be accepted as acceptable marriage. Why would a society say that you're going to allow an institution that is based upon perversion? Does that mean do you discriminate against those who are homosexuals? No, you don't discriminate against them. Does that mean you lock them up? No. Does that mean that you don't give them a job? No. What that means is you don't promote it in society. That's all it means. It means you don't promote homosexual behavior as a normal variant. That's all that it means. It also means that the institution of marriage is not a right. There's nothing in the Constitution that says marriage is a right. Okay? Marriage is a cultural phenomenon. And because it is not a right, it is neither prohibited nor is it a right. Therefore, it is a privilege that society takes upon itself, and it can define it. Society has the privilege of defining its culture, and whatever culture that happens to be. And if society decides that it wants to allow homosexual marriage, then society has the privilege of doing so. But, and that's it. So that's it. It is not up to the Supreme Court to decide what that ought to be. If individuals living in a state decide in the majority through a democratic process, a democratic Republican constitutional process that defines marriage in such a way, it is the state's prerogative to do so, and the federal government's got no business getting involved. If the state says that same-sex marriage is acceptable under their law, determined through a democratic Republican constitutional process, well, then that's it. But the federal government has got no business, and of course the federal government, the Supreme Court said exactly that. It is not up to the Supreme Court to define within a state what is considered marriage. Well, let's put all that aside let's put all that aside. Is there someone on the phone? Hello? Anyway, I don't know. I'm being ignored by the engineer. Is there someone on the phone? If he wants to talk, otherwise, Anyway, where was I? Does the Supreme Court have the authority to interpret the Constitution? It does not. There's nothing in the Constitution which gives that authority to the Supreme Court. Does the president have the authority not to enforce a federal legislation? That he does not. He or she does not have that authority. The Constitution does not give him that authority. So there's so much here that are just so unconstitutional. It's completely absurd. The Supreme Court is not the arbiter of the Constitution. We, the people, created the Constitution, not the Supreme Court, not the president, and not the legislature. Federal laws are not the only laws in the country, and the Constitution does not impact laws within a state, and should not impact the individual. Federal laws are primarily construed to determine issues between states and between the United States and foreign entities. The Constitution only allows within a state the requirement that the federal government makes sure that every state has a Republican form of government, a representative form of government. That is all the Constitution says. Also, that the Constitution can affect an individual only if the individual is doing things of national or international consequence, such as treason, counterfeiting, copyright laws, stuff like that. And they're specifically delineated. Those functions are specifically delineated. And if they're not delineated, then the federal government has no authority over that situation or issue. Okay, let's go to Melvin, right? Melvin, Senator Carey, thanks for calling. Melvin.
Yes, Dr. Gelman. I understand in Texas, if a woman is shot that's pregnant, the shooter is charged with a double murder, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
So it is a case there where killing an unborn infant is a murder. It's state law, I think.
Yes.
I read that in the paper. So
that instance is, yes.
I think Carl was fixing to mention that a while ago, and the subject was changed, I believe.
Right,
Okay.
but that is not, but the state defines that as murder. The state defines that as murder.
Well, that's true,
But if that, no, hang on a second. If the mother if that same woman goes into an abortion clinic and has that infant's life terminated, that is not murder.
under existing law.
Under existing law, yes, under existing law.
That's right. But now, Mrs. Rowe, by the way, when she sued,
I'm not interested in
later,
that. I don't care about what she said. I don't.
Mind.
I don't care. What relevance is that to me? Of what relevance? Of what relevance is it?
She changed her mind. So did her daughter that was born.
That is not. And so Roe v. Wade was thrown out. So Roe v. Wade no longer is the law. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's still the existing
So then, what
law.
difference does it make what she says now? What difference does it make?
Because she was the original instigator.
She was not an instigator. She was a pawn. She was a patsy.
Whatever you
okay.
want to call it.
There's a big difference between being an instigator and a pawn. There's a big difference between being an instigator and a pawn. One is to instigator uses, and a pawn is used. There's a big difference.
Well, I don't know who used her.
The lawyers, the pro-choice movement used her. The same way that the gay rights used in this decision. Where do you think this came from? These people were used by the gay rights group to present the case. You have these people with agenda. They want to get a case to the Supreme Court to change the laws or whatever, and they have to find a case. They have to find a case. In the Roe v. Wade, they found this woman. They find a case. They use these people in order to justify or to achieve the agenda they're trying to achieve. Their ends.
Well, she probably talked to social workers and advisors. You're probably right there. But
it's not probably. That's what happened. But I'm not understand. But that's not. But so what? That doesn't make the law legal or illegal. That she changed her mind is not really relevant to the issue. It's really not relevant. That the point is that you're going back to your original assertion that murder about the mother being the involuntary killing of the in utero infant by another party, okay, that the state defines as murder. If that woman kills that infant voluntarily by going to an abortion clinic, that is legal. And if we're going to have this discussion, it is critical that we understand the distinction between legal and illegal, between moral and immoral, and between right and wrong. These are all different words that mean different things. Something you can do something wrong and it still be legal. The killing of the Jews, or the segregation of the Jews, the incarceration of Jews in Germany from 1928 to 1945 was wrong, but it was legal in the German system of jurisprudence.
Well, the Geneva Convention didn't cover civilians till 1949.
No one even. Who cares about the Geneva Convention? That's rules made by man. That's that's rules made by man. Who cares about the Geneva Convention? What has that got to do with anything?
Well, the original Geneva Convention forgot about the civilians. They didn't think people with armies.
It was rules of war, and not everybody signed it anyway. And even those who signed it didn't abide by it. What has that got to do with what we're talking about? You brought up the issue of legal versus illegal, murder versus justifiable homicide. I'm trying to explain that the distinction is made through a system of legislation, through law. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It doesn't make it immoral or moral. It just simply makes it law, legal or illegal. And it doesn't make it legitimate or illegitimate. There's a distinction between legitimate and legal. They are not synonyms. They mean different things. Anything else?
No, that's about it.
Thanks. Okay, I guess we'll finish up with Scott. What the heck's taking you so long? I've been waiting for your call.
You have had a great show on today, and I loved all the debates. It was outstanding. What can we expect? The Supreme Court, Bush issued most of them. Obama's put a few in. I mean, look at them. They're all from the Northeast. They're all from the Ivy League schools, most of them from Harvard. And look at the lady who just did this big filibuster, the senator that held it up for 11 hours until the ignorant people of Austin came in and started making so much disturbance nobody could carry anything on. Where'd she come from? Harvard, too. I mean, it's
I didn't know that.
It's the same old story. Same old story.
Yeah, exactly right. Those who listen to my program know that my belief is this country's being run by a bunch of Northeastern elitists that want to return us to the divine right of kings, an aristocracy out of the Northeast. You're exactly right. As far as the Supreme Court, 7 justices from Harvard, 2 from Yale. Those schools are 100 miles apart. How does that represent the United States? How does that represent the founding fathers? It is a group of elitists that want to impose their views upon the rest of us, which are unconstitutional, but they've got reins of power. So you're exactly right.
Yeah, Dan, it's the way it's sitting right now, they're starting to infiltrate other states, like Texas. This lady, she's a law graduate from Harvard. She filibustered for 11 hours, and then you had a bunch of basically, I don't know if they were, they were definitely liberal, but they were definitely, my whole question was, where were the pro-life people? And you had some of these people that go, well, I'm Christian and I'm Catholic, but, I'm for abortion. Well,
Scott,
how can you be Catholic or Christian and be for abortion?
Because, like so many of our previous callers, you want to make up your own rule. They want to make up their own rules. Well, you can't be making up you're exactly right. The Catholic Church says, to be a Catholic, these are the rules. And obedience to the rule is voluntary, right? No one forces you to be Catholic. So if you want to call yourself a Catholic, to be a Catholic, you are defined by the rules of the institution. If you say I'm going to accept some rules and not accept others, how does that make you a Catholic? You're exactly right about that. Now,
the problem is we have too many hypocrites in this country.
People don't understand what being a hypocrite is. Well, let me ask you this, Scott. Where were the state police? Is that the way legislation is done?
The state police aren't going to be anywhere around because the ruling party, which is the Democrats, by President Obama and all the legislators.
But in the state, I'm talking about in the state. Wait a second.
Look at Rubio. Rubio just showed his true colors.
We're running out of time. Wait a second, Scott. Let's come back to Texas. How is it that the state police allowed 400 or so thugs and terrorists, allow them to disrupt a session of the legislature? Don't you find that somewhat contrived? Scott, let me tell you something. If you went to Austin and started yelling and screaming in the hallways, you'd be out on your ear in the street, if not in prison. Is that not so?
They'd take me off, call me a terrorist, and throw me in a federal prison somewhere.
Well, at least in state prison. Well, why didn't they do that? This whole thing sounds contrived to me. There was people on the inside that allowed that to happen. Where were the state police? Why were those people not removed from the chambers where the discussion was being held? That whole thing was contrived.
Yeah, the whole thing was a big setup to start with.
So we'll see.
No
but
doubt.
Aren't they calling another session in order to again? Or am I wrong about that? I thought I read somewhere.
Governor Rick Perry's putting in a special session again to try and get this passed through again.
Well,
I mean, they're going from 24 weeks down to 20 weeks. I mean, come on, that's a really significant number. I don't think 4 weeks is that significant. I mean, I think it should be.
Well, I'll tell you, Scott, it's significant for the 20-weeker. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Okay, Scott, we're out of time. Thanks for calling. I was wondering when you were going to chime in on this. Anyway, it's a 7th KRV TalkBack, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, bringing a rational voice to the irrational, apparently. I am tougher on those who agree with my position, but who cannot articulate their ideas properly, because that is the weakness on our side that the other side uses against us. We have to understand the distinctions and what's reality and what is true. We cannot impose our personal definition on words or objects and take that as fact. So we'll be back next week, 7 KRV. Thanks for all my listeners. I've never cut off so many people. That's like a record. I think I cut off 3 people. But I couldn't take any more. Okay. Be back next week.